All right, let's jump right in to this deep dive. We're going deep into the life and crimes of Joe Metheny.
Yeah.
You chose to dive into his case.
Yeah.
So that tells me you're probably interested in what makes seemingly ordinary people commit horrific acts. And our main source for this is Metheny's Wikipedia entry,
Okay.
which, believe me, is a wild ride.
I believe it.
Metheny claimed 13 victims, though he was only convicted of 2 murders,
Wow.
with evidence confirming a third. And here's the thing, he confessed to cannibalism. But he also held down a steady job and was often described as intelligent and well-mannered. It's almost as though we're dealing with 2 different people.
Yeah, it's that jarring contrast that makes Metheny so fascinating, wouldn't you say? He really challenges our assumptions about what evil looks like.
Yeah.
And Metheny's claim of 13 victims is particularly interesting. I mean, think about the psychological implications of that. Was it a genuine belief?
Right.
Or a form of boasting or self-aggrandizement? And, for investigators, those kinds of claims can be a double-edged sword. They provide potential leads, but also require careful corroboration,
Of course.
especially when you're dealing with someone who may be manipulating the narrative.
That's a great point. It makes you question everything he said. So let's rewind to Metheny's early life.
Okay.
He was born in Baltimore in 1955, and his childhood was, by most accounts, pretty rough. His father died in a car accident when he was young, leaving his mother to work multiple jobs.
Oh, wow.
There are even reports of Metheny spending time living with other families.
It's important to acknowledge the impact of childhood trauma.
Right.
While we can't excuse his actions, understanding his formative years might shed light on his trajectory. That said, the accounts of his childhood are actually contradictory. Metheny claims significant neglect, but his mother described it as relatively normal. She insisted they were never hungry and disputed the claims about him living with other families.
It makes you wonder about the role memory and perception play in shaping a person's narrative,
Right,
especially someone like Metheny.
right.
We see this again with his military service. He claimed to have served in Vietnam and developed a heroin addiction there. However, there's no record of him being in Vietnam.
Huh.
His mother remembers him serving in Germany,
Okay.
which seems more likely given the timeline.
Right, and that discrepancy raises questions about his intent.
Yeah.
Was he trying to craft a more troubled past? Or could this be a distorted memory?
Okay.
It all adds to the complexity of his character.
Okay, so fast forward to the 1990s.
Okay.
Metheny was living a pretty hard life. He bounced between bars and homeless camps, struggling with addiction to crack cocaine, heroin, and alcohol.
Wow.
Yet despite this, he somehow managed to hold down a steady job as a forklift driver.
Here we see that duality again. On one hand, you have a man battling addiction
Right.
and living on the fringes of society.
Yeah.
On the other, he's showing up for work and, according to some, presenting as intelligent and well-mannered.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he was compartmentalizing these 2 vastly different
Right.
aspects of his life.
It's hard to wrap your head around. Metheny was a large man, over 6 feet tall and overweight. Ironically, his nickname was Tiny. It almost feels like a dark joke, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
This physically imposing figure carrying this secret darkness within him.
It really underscores the idea that we can't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
Someone capable of terrible acts can move through the world appearing completely
Right.
unremarkable. It forces us to think about how we perceive danger
Yeah.
and how easily it can be hidden.
Okay, so this brings us to his crimes. In 1994, Metheny murdered 39-year-old Kathy Ann Magaziner,
Okay.
burying her body on the factory grounds where he worked.
Wow.
What strikes me is that her body lay undiscovered for over 2 years.
Oh, gosh.
He later confessed to digging up her remains, putting her head in a box, and throwing it in the trash.
That detail is chilling, isn't it?
Yeah.
It speaks to a level of premeditation
Right.
and a disturbing lack of remorse. It wasn't just a crime of passion.
No.
There was a coldness to his actions.
In 1995, Metheny was tried for the murders of 2 men,
Okay.
Randall Brewer and Randy Pyer, who were killed with an axe in a homeless camp.
Wow.
This case had a lot of twists and turns, including another man being convicted of stealing the murder weapon
Oh, wow.
and using it in a separate murder on the same day. Metheny was actually acquitted in this case due to lack of evidence. However, he later confessed to these murders as well.
It highlights the complexities of the justice system,
Right.
particularly when dealing with cases involving transient populations and conflicting accounts. The fact that another man was convicted using the same murder weapon
Right.
speaks to the chaotic nature of the environment
Yeah.
and the challenges investigators faced.
It also shows how easy it is for those living on the margins of society
Yeah.
to become victims. Their stories often go unheard, their disappearances less likely to be investigated thoroughly.
You're right. It's a systemic issue that we need to be aware of.
Yeah,
The most vulnerable members of our society are often the most susceptible to violence.
right.
And their cases deserve just as much attention and
Yeah.
diligence as any other.
In 1986, Metheny committed another murder, this time stabbing Kimberly Lynn Spicer.
Mm,
This would be the crime that finally led to his capture.
okay.
But before that, he kidnapped and attempted to rape a woman named Rita Kemper, luring her to his trailer at the pallet factory where he worked.
Kemper's case is crucial because she survived. Her escape
Right.
and her willingness to go to the police
Yeah.
ultimately exposed Metheny's crimes.
Yes.
Think about the courage it took for her to do that, to relive that trauma and face her attacker.
Her bravery not only saved her own life, but potentially others as well.
Ac-
It was during the investigation into Kemper's attack that Metheny's friend tipped off police about Spicer's body, which Metheny had hidden at the factory. Upon his arrest, Metheny began confessing to other murders, even leading police to the reburied remains of Kathy Magaziner.
This raises questions about his motivations for confessing.
Mm-hmm.
Was it genuine remorse?
Right.
Or a desire to control the narrative even as he was being apprehended?
Yeah.
It's a psychological puzzle that continues to fascinate and trouble us.
And then there are his confessions to killing up to 10 people, mostly young, white sex workers struggling with addiction.
Wow.
He even described a rush he got from taking a life.
Oh, gosh.
But can we believe everything he said?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We have his statements, often graphic and detailed, but matching them to concrete evidence can be difficult, especially with victims on the margins of society,
Right.
like those he targeted.
It's a chilling thought that some victims might never get justice.
Yeah.
Their stories lost in the shadow of a predator's notoriety.
It's a sobering reminder of the need for greater awareness and advocacy
Yeah.
for vulnerable populations.
Yeah.
We need to ensure that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, has a voice and that their stories are heard and believed.
So as we delve deeper into this case,
Yeah,
we're going to be grappling with some really tough questions.
absolutely.
How do we reconcile the Metheny, who could hold down a job and engage in seemingly normal social interactions,
Right,
with the monster who preyed on the innocent?
right.
How much of what he said can we actually corroborate?
Mm-hmm.
And what does his case tell us about the dark side of human nature that lurks beneath the surface?
These are questions without easy answers.
Right.
But by exploring them together, we can hopefully gain a deeper understanding of Metheny's case
Right.
and what it reveals about the nature of evil itself.
We've been talking about the chilling contradictions in Joe Metheny's life.
Yeah.
The seemingly ordinary facade masking a horrifying reality. It's enough to make anyone wonder about the people they encounter every day.
That unease is understandable. It's a reminder that we can't always see the darkness lurking beneath the surface.
Right.
By exploring these cases, by trying to understand the complexities of individuals like Metheny, we can perhaps become more attuned to those subtle signs,
Yeah,
the red flags that might otherwise go unnoticed.
absolutely. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Right.
And speaking of power, let's delve into the legal proceedings that followed Metheny's arrest.
Okay.
In 1997, he was tried for the kidnapping and attempted rape of Rita Kemper, the woman who bravely escaped and alerted the authorities.
Mm-hmm.
It's a testament to her strength that she was willing to face him in court.
It's incredible, isn't it, to not only survive such a horrific ordeal,
Right,
but to then have the courage to confront your attacker and ensure he's held accountable.
right.
Kemper's testimony was crucial in securing a 50-year sentence for Metheny on those charges.
Wow.
He was acquitted of attempted murder, though,
Hmm.
which highlights the complexities of the legal system.
It must be incredibly difficult for Kemper to relive that trauma and still see him escape the most serious charge. It makes you think about the burden placed on survivors in these cases.
Yeah.
The strength it takes to not only heal, but to also seek justice.
You've hit on a vital point. The focus often shifts to the perpetrator,
Right.
the sensationalism of their crimes. But it's essential to remember the victims, their stories, their resilience. Their voices deserve to be heard, and their healing should be paramount.
Absolutely.
Then in 1998 came the trial for the murder of Kimberly Lynn Spicer, the crime that ultimately sealed Metheny's fate.
And this is where the case takes another turn, right?
Yeah.
Because Metheny was initially sentenced to death for Spicer's murder.
Right.
During his sentencing hearing, he made those chilling statements about enjoying the killings,
Wow.
about the rush he felt. It painted a picture of someone truly monstrous.
Yes, his words were shocking, even to those accustomed to dealing with the darkest aspects of human behavior.
Wow.
But here's where the legal system, with all its intricacies, comes into play.
Okay.
In 2000, Metheny's death sentence was overturned,
Ah.
and his punishment was reduced to life without parole.
That's a pretty significant reversal. What was the reasoning behind that decision?
Well, the death penalty was initially imposed based on the prosecution's argument that the murder was committed during a robbery.
Okay.
However, the evidence presented at trial didn't definitively prove that robbery was Metheny's primary motive.
Oh, wow.
Essentially, it became a technicality that spared him from execution.
So despite the brutality of his crimes and his own confessions, a legal technicality ultimately changed his sentence.
Mm-hmm.
This brings up a lot of questions about the death penalty itself. Is it ever truly just? Does it deter crime?
Right.
Or does it simply perpetuate a cycle of violence?
These are profound ethical and philosophical questions that society continues to grapple with, and Metheny's case provides a compelling case study,
Right.
forcing us to confront the nuances of capital punishment and the potential for both error and injustice within the legal system.
It's a stark reminder that even in cases where guilt seems evident, the legal process can be incredibly complex,
Right.
and the consequences of those complexities can be life-altering, both for the convicted and for the families of the victims.
You've touched on another crucial aspect here,
Yeah.
the impact on the families.
Yeah.
For them, this isn't just an abstract legal debate.
Yeah.
It's about seeking justice for their loved ones,
Yeah.
finding some sense of closure amidst unimaginable grief.
Right.
And a decision like this, overturning a death sentence,
Yeah.
can reopen old wounds and complicate the healing process.
It's a lot to process, and it underscores the weight of these decisions.
Yeah.
It's not just about one man, but about the ripple effects that extend outwards, touching countless lives.
Absolutely.
In Metheny's case, even without the death penalty, he eventually met his end behind bars, dying in prison in 2017 at the age of 62.
Hmm.
His death closed a chapter on this dark and disturbing saga.
It did, but the questions linger. How many victims were there truly? What drove him to commit such atrocities?
Right.
And perhaps most intriguingly, how do we reconcile the intelligent, well-spoken individual,
Right.
some described, with the monster who preyed on the innocent?
That dissonance is what makes this case so unsettling, isn't it?
It is.
It challenges our assumptions about good and evil,
Yeah.
about the nature of humanity itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like looking into a mirror and seeing something you don't recognize,
Right.
something both familiar and utterly alien.
And that's where the true power of exploring these cases lies.
Yeah,
It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves,
right.
about the capacity for darkness that exists within us all.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about glorifying the perpetrator, but
Yeah.
about understanding the complexities of human behavior,
Yeah,
the interplay of nature and nurture,
right.
the choices that lead someone down a path of destruction.
It's a journey into the heart of darkness,
Yeah.
but one that can ultimately illuminate our own understanding of the world and our place in it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of Joe Metheny, that journey takes us to a rather unexpected place.
Okay.
A place where true crime intersects with popular culture in a way that's both fascinating and disturbing.
You're talking about the Mr. Meat mobile horror game series, right? It's quite a phenomenon, actually. A series of games directly inspired by Metheny's crimes.
Wow.
In these games, players find themselves trapped in a butcher's house, stalked by a menacing figure who, well, let's just say he takes his inspiration from Metheny's more gruesome confessions.
It's a strange twist, isn't it? This real-life horror story transformed into a form of entertainment. It makes you wonder about our fascination with true crime,
Yeah,
our desire to confront the dark side of humanity,
right.
even through the filter of a game. Is it a way of processing our fears,
Mm-hmm.
or is there something more unsettling at play?
It's a complex question and one that deserves further exploration.
Right.
On one hand, you could argue that these games provide a safe space to explore our anxieties about violence and vulnerability.
Right.
They allow us to confront those fears in a controlled environment where we have a sense of agency and the ability to win against the darkness.
But then there's the ethical dimension to consider. Is it exploitative to profit from a real-life tragedy, to turn someone's suffering into entertainment? And what does it say about us as a society
Right.
that we're drawn to these narratives, that we find a certain thrill in the macabre?
Those are important questions,
Yeah.
and there are no easy answers. Perhaps it's a combination of factors. A desire for understanding, a fascination with the psychology of evil,
Yeah.
and yes, perhaps even a morbid curiosity. But I think it's crucial to approach these stories with sensitivity,
Right.
to remember the real-life victims and the impact their suffering continues to have.
You're right. It's a fine line to walk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one that we, as consumers of true crime, need to be mindful of.
Absolutely.
Our fascination with these cases shouldn't come at the expense of empathy for the victims and a recognition of the real-life consequences of violence. We've been delving into the dark world of Joe Metheny, a man whose case is as perplexing as it is disturbing. It's easy to get lost in the gruesome details, the shocking confessions, but I keep coming back to the questions that linger long after the headlines fade.
Exactly. What can we truly learn from a case like this? I mean, how do we make sense of the contradictions, the seemingly ordinary life juxtaposed with the horrific acts of violence? These are the questions that keep us engaged. The ones that force us to look inward and confront uncomfortable truths about human nature.
Well, the biggest questions for me is how to reconcile those conflicting accounts of his childhood. Was there more to the story than his mother let on? Or was Metheny intentionally shaping a narrative, creating a backstory that fit the image he wanted to project?
It's a question that may never have a definitive answer, but it speaks to the elusive nature of truth, especially when eating with someone like Metheny, someone who seems to have reveled in deception and manipulation. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the gray areas, a combination of genuine hardship and intentional distortion.
And then there's the question of his military service, the unsubstantiated claims about Vietnam and heroin addiction. Was it a way to garner sympathy, to paint himself as a victim of circumstance, or was it a sign of a deeper psychological disturbance, a blurring of reality and fantasy?
It's possible that both elements were at play. We know that Metheny was intelligent and articulate. He understood the power of storytelling. Perhaps he was crafting a narrative that he believed would resonate with those he encountered, a way to explain away his darker impulses.
It's a chilling thought. The idea that someone could be so aware of the impact of their words, so calculated in their manipulation. It makes you wonder if those who knew him, those who described him as intelligent and well-mannered, were simply being taken in by a master manipulator.
It's certainly a possibility. But it's also worth considering that these seemingly positive qualities might have coexisted alongside his darker tendencies. That's the unsettling reality of human nature. We're complex beings capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty.
It's that duality that makes Metheny's case so compelling and so disturbing. And it reminds us that evil doesn't always present itself in the ways we might expect. It can lurk beneath the surface, masked by charisma and normalcy.
And that's why it's so important to be vigilant, to trust our instincts. We can't afford to be naive about the potential for darkness in others. But at the same time, we shouldn't let fear paralyze us or lead us to make generalizations about entire groups of people. It's a delicate balance.
Absolutely. We need to find that middle ground where we're aware of the dangers, but also open to the possibility of goodness in others. And I think that's where the importance of understanding, of seeking knowledge comes in.
Precisely. The more we learn about the complexities of human behavior, the factors that contribute to violence, the subtle signs of danger, well, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and those we care about.
This deep dive into Joe Metheny's life and crimes hasn't provided any easy answers, but it has, I hope, given us all a lot to think about. It's a reminder that the world can be a dark and unpredictable place, but it's also a call to action, to be more aware, more compassionate, more committed to creating a world where violence and suffering are less likely to occur.
You've summed it up beautifully. Ultimately, it's about using this knowledge, this unsettling journey into the heart of darkness, to fuel our efforts to create a brighter future. It's about remembering the victims, advocating for the vulnerable, and working towards a society where everyone feels safe and respected.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the dark side of human nature, the better equipped we are to confront it and strive for a world where stories like Metheny's become less frequent, less tragic, and less impactful on our collective consciousness.